director, primarily in financial services and technology. Do a lot of consultancy work, particularly investment management, to be honest with you. I've done a few board memberships and strategic advisors, and I've written a few books, a bit of lecturing, and obviously do speaking. Hence, we're here now. So just 3 points of admin just before I dive into the detail. The first one, I have had a few problems with my internet over the last 24 hours. So if I do disappear, I will be back within about 10 seconds. So please don't think the presentation's come to an odd end. Secondly, as you can probably hear, I do have a bit of a cold, so that is probably me, not your microphones. And I believe if you do have any messages or questions, feel free to type them into the text box on Teams, and I'll obviously try and pick them up as we go through. But I do only have one window, so if I'm a little bit delayed replying back, please don't take it as an offence. It's just more incompetence as opposed to anything else. But anyway, let's crack on. So finished all that. So I'm going to cover 5 points there. The first of the points is really around why change is not implemented successfully. Then move to the second one there, which is how change projects impact society. Then talk about why change fails, and then we move on to the crux of the thing. What is the human element of change, and why is the human element important? So let's just focus on the first item there, that change isn't implemented successfully. Without wanting to sort of tell you guys and ladies how to suck eggs, most change is often implemented poorly, i.e. doesn't give the benefits hoped for. I believe all of us are technologists, change management people, so we'll all probably agree with that. And there's some interesting stats here. It's slightly out of date, 2008, but McKinsey said 70% of change initiatives fail. Kotter, who, for those in the know, is a real change boffin, says 70% of changes fail. The next item there is that the other way to look at it, only 30% of they achieve their intended outcomes, which is 2014. McKinsey again restated that 44% of initiatives do not deliver sustained value, slightly better than 70%, but still almost half. So basically what that means is, and this is almost like despite a whole sort of like industry being in place around change management, which I somewhat embarrassingly have to include myself in that. So we have, and this covers things like mythologies. I mean, those of you who've worked in change management have probably heard of all of those. Akar model, Kotter, Lewins, McKinsey's, Bridges, there's Prince, and there's many others. There's lots of consultancy firms you can see there, professional services, which is including myself, mergers, acquisitions, culture change, agile, workforce transition, all these types of transitions, so consultancy to try and improve the record of change. There's education, again, courses, university courses, online platforms, learning and development within organisations, and change leadership is often embedded in executive programs. There's all sorts of technology tools that help or hinder, as the case may be. Some of these, I must admit, I'm not that familiar with, but I've used a few of them. Organisational development, there's lots of works on organisational development, leadership behaviours around change management, managing culture, leadership and development programs, and OD, stands for Organisation Development Specialists, work alongside change agents to realise value. Lots of academia studies. I mean, those you can go Google Scholar and just Google change management, you'll have an absolute. I don't think you could read all of them in your whole life if you wanted to. Harvard Business Review, various books, including a book written by myself, and and Gardner, who I've worked with, Deloitte, Prosky, KPMG, Ernst Young, thousands of these consultancies out there. There's lots of industry bodies. Again, I won't go through all of them line by line. Not really the purpose for this. And there's a lot of change management. There's integration with other disciplines. So basically, it's not a very good situation we're in, really, despite all this great stuff that's supporting everything. As you can see there, change isn't implemented successfully. And the challenge with this is it does, failed projects do impact society, often in a very nasty way. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I just did a chat GPT search on this, and this came up with these projects. UK NHS, which is the health service in the UK where I'm from, there's always massive, every 3 or 4 years the scandal comes out with a major change project that's found. LA, as in Los Angeles, the iPad program, the idea was to create some sort of equitable digital access across groups. Total failure. Kodak, job economic disruption, failure. The FBI, in fact, I did a case study of this around trying to automate the FBI infrastructure to make it safe, and it wasn't made safe, and obviously it was a risk to national security. MyGov online census in Australia had lots of failures and basically just destroyed trust. Berlin airport was a very under-green airport when it went through. It caused lots of problems. The change project was a total failure, so Department wasted lots of money. It was delayed. Energy in South Africa, Eskom, again, an upgrade to their systems didn't work. Called public outages, energy was unavailable, and it was a strain in economics. And the other one here, which is actually at the moment, I did this in on the last minute. For those, I don't know who's in the UK or follow this, there was a big scandal in the UK over the last 20 years where there was a system called Horizon, and it was having problems with its accounting software. Basically what it was, they ended up prosecuting 900 people in the UK who most of them went to prison because basically they were prosecuted for fraud because the accounting system didn't match the cash they had on premise. And it was actually found out the UK Post Office system Horizon was at fault. So these people went to prison, sometimes like 4 or 5 years, completely unnecessarily. And there's a big political issue in the UK to try and get those convictions overturned and have some sort of repercussions to the people who are head of the post office, and also get some sort of like compensation pay for these people who's literally had the last 20 years of their life ruined. Plus, there's that should be plus, not please. Plus, there's many others, and I'm sure all the guys and girls on the call could probably name another 20, 30, 40 projects they've worked on that they're aware of. There's also the issue around projects where that aren't public knowledge. Private companies don't have to publish issues with their projects, and if you look at the top of those ones, majority tend to be government or public information. But if you're a private firm, you don't have to publish. Some project disasters are hidden under NDAs, so you don't really know non-disclosure agreements or legal agreements. So they get covered up. And my favourite one is, and I must admit, I have moved there, is that you end up with you change the scope, or you reduce the scope, or you change the scope of the project to make it appear successful. You say everything was, the project was delivered on time within budget, but don't realise that you've actually de-scoped 30%, 40%, 50% of the activity along those lines. And the other thing, obviously, with this creates a lot of blame shift. So therefore, we sort of spoke about change is not implemented successfully. Failed change projects impact society, but why did change fail? Noting all the points I noted earlier on. There's absolutely hundreds of these causes, and again, I just did a Google search and also added a few items from my personal experience, and there's loads. Lack of vision, leadership, resistance, comms. Just jumping further down, ineffective change management, change not sustained, and the list is endless. And there's lots and lots of causes. And the impacts is, impacts lack of governance, siloed departments, cross-functional, rigid hierarchies. So there's a large number of reasons why change fails. But if you notice, a lot of those reasons on the previous page, they're very much along the lines of, very much along the lines of like hard stuff, as processes, controls, plans. I think one of the biggest points is a lot of people is that one issue links all these issues together or brings them all together. And it's the ability to manage, and this is the crux of the whole presentation, is to manage the human side of change. So what this basically means is, what is the human side of change? So basically, the key point is change is a human phenomenon. Sounds like a flash. Ultimately, yeah, change is triggered by people. Yeah, change doesn't appear out of the blue or out of a tunnel or something like that. It's triggered by people. That could be your clients, i.e., clients want a new product you need to develop, or a change to the service. A supplier, supplier could be doing, for example, I've worked at places where I've worked in financial services. One of your suppliers could be moving their technology platform, so therefore you need to make some changes to cope with that. You can have internal trigger changes, operational teams want some more efficiency, sales teams want some better reported. There could be market changes. For example, there could be new. I work in investment services management. I said before, so there's been a push over the years for self-servicing on webs, apps, and on your iPhone, Android, and that sort of stuff. So you get market changes. There could be regulatory change. Financial services and education, where I work, is heavily regulated, so a new bit of regulation comes in. And political, as for those live in strange times at the moment politically, and a new political change, a new prime minister or a new president or a new head of government comes in, and that impacts the change. But all of these are triggered by people. That's the key point to remember. The next item is that as well as triggered by people, the change is implemented by people. So again, it could be the same people, it could be different people. So basically, you could have an in-house team that implements a change. That could be, an in-house software team, an in-house business change team, and so on. The suppliers, I mean, you may call them external companies, but ultimately they are people. So if you, as I mentioned before earlier, I worked with a vendor who's changed their technology platform, or moved it to the cloud, to be more honest, and we had to do some work with them to engage back with them. But we had to work with people, customers. If you make a major change to your web platform or some of your services, whether those customers are large organisations or individual retail people, they're going to have to take change. You may need to employ contractors or consultants to bring in. Again, they're all people. And also other changes could impact the local communities. I remember, I was getting the best of me, is I worked in a local community where we were shutting down some major offices, which basically the largest employer in that district was gone. So we had to do a lot of work with the local community to try and make sure that they were reassured that nothing else nasty was going to happen. And last but not least, is used by people. So it's triggered by people, implemented by people, used by people. So basically, or you can even say it impacts people. So if you implement a new change, it can result in new jobs being added or new jobs being amended, or unfortunately, sometimes people do lose jobs. I mean, it's not pleasant by any means. I have been on both sides. It's horrible, but sometimes that does happen. You can have new processes, a new process to onboard the client, a new process to offboard the client because of a regulatory change, or you might need to amend the process, or if you're actually doing some sort of automation, a process could be removed. So there's all these sort of weird dynamics, and then you have new products. So basically, if you, for example, just trying to think, a service on a social media platform, for example, that could be a new service or a product. Use those terms interchangeably. That will need to be amended or removed, and so on. But I think the key point to remember is that the bit at the very top here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, is a human phenomenon. It's triggered by people, implemented by people, and used by people. So what that basically means is, and it says down the bottom, therefore people are involved in all parts of the change platform. Therefore, it's essential to manage the human side, i.e. you need to think, make sure it's all people are involved, therefore to follow. And one final quote down here, which I forgot about, is Lorezi and Riley, albeit 26 years ago. So it's a slightly dated quote, but I don't disagree. That is that change is 80% social and only 20% technical. I would probably actually put it nearer sort of 90% social and nearer 10% technical from my experience. But the point it's trying to say is that it's a social human phenomenon that change management is. So now let's move on. So we're sort of moving on to the crux of it, is that we've sort of spoke about why change is not implemented successfully. We've talked about foul change projects and how they impact society more widely. We've also then moved on to why does change fail, and we should move logically into the what is basically the change is a human phenomenon, and we discussed what the human element, human phenomenon change is. But now let's look at how we can actually, why is it important, and how we can manage it. And hopefully, some of these hints and tips will give you something to take away. Probably just slightly going to cover some of the points we've covered earlier on. Sorry, let's get this working. Again, just to re-stress this point, and I'll probably stress this every so often, so be prepared to be bored to death about this. The key point is that humans are essential for implementing change, which basically means they need to be engaged and involved, and they need to be engaged and involved properly, i.e. that they feel they're actually being engaged, they feel like they're being involved, they feel like they're actually adding some value to the change. The key point there is to make sure they're not being fobbed off or involved, so you can tick a box and stuff like that. But more on that to come. Or in other words, and this is the crux point. So if you want to take one thing away from this, it's probably the next 3 or 4 bullet points here. Individual humans need to be treated as individuals. Each person is unique. They need to be treated as a on their unique side, because they'll have their own demands and needs. Or even sometimes, realistically, you might have to teach them as groups. And they must, as opposed to treating them as like faceless resources. When you do project planning, you do resource management, you tend to treat people like lumps of meat and they're faceless resources. But as individuals, you do need to treat them as individuals, because they have their own needs and their own concerns. And that is really the key point. And that's the point you should always remember, that when you're working with individuals, humans on change, they need to be treated as individuals and not for faceless resources. Therefore, moving on away from sort of like the high level sort of like issues, is that people need to be aware of how the change will impact them. So therefore, for most changes, you will have some sort of human engagement in place anyway, just by the nature of the change. If you're doing any sort of change, whether it's something on the size of the major multinational corporation or if it's a small firm change, there will often be some top-down update from management on how things are going. It normally is a little bit very generic, very high level, covering, everything's going really well, we're doing this change, the benefits of the firm are A, B, and C, the challenges are X, Y, and Z, which is fine. It's all very, very, very good, but they're not tailored to individual peoples or groups. So it doesn't say, dear John Smith or dear accountants, this change will impact you in this way. Dear sales team will impact you in this way. It's all very, very high level. And to be honest with you, it may be me getting very skeptical in my old age, it can be very, very cheesy and a little bit, I don't know if there's a character in the UK called David Brent, or The Office. I think they have a US version of it as well, and I'm sure they have versions around the world. It's very clunky and cringy and horrible. But it is, these sort of top-down stuff does need to be done, even it is a little bit awkward. But it's also the method, as you can see down the right-hand side, is very much a one-way broadcast from the top, like a leader speaking to the led. Also, individuals will be engaged through doing the work. If you're doing a major corporate-wide project, there could be working groups, there could be work streams, there could be workshops, project team meetings, and individuals will get involved in that, which is quite good that we're doing the work. But it's often very focused on the area that they're focused in. So, for example, if you're doing my previous job, we were doing a corporate merger in the UK. And we had a team who was just doing all the communications, writing out to clients just to tell them what was going on, type thing. But that was very focused on just the communications, making sure they went out, they got signed off. But that group didn't really know much about the wider context. So basically, it created a sort of like a silo. But that's good though. But that's just the way projects happen. You get this sort of natural silo, and obviously the method there is via meetings, emails, and reports. However, coming back to my point, the importance to manage the human side, these are very much functional, getting the work done type of thing, and not really managing the human side of the change, which basically means you need to have some sort of separate work stream or work streams, as the case may be, which is required, which will focus on trying to understand what people really think about the change. I.e., are they worried about the change? Do they have any ideas to try and make the change better or less worse, as the case may be? Do they have any concerns? So it's very much the sort of the hearts and the gut feeling of people to do the work. And the key thing is try and understand what they really mean. And I'll come to this a bit later on. So effectively, there's a chap called John Pierman Morgan who was actually set up JP Morgan. So it's original JP Morgan, I guess. And he actually said there were two reasons people give an excuse, or they give a reason to do something. The first reason is very logical, very plausible, makes a lot of sense. And the second reason is the real reason. So really the challenge there is to try and drill down very tactfully, and again, some ideas on this later, on how you can drill down between almost like a deeper understanding. And a prime example would be many years ago, probably getting on to about 15, 16 years ago, there was in the UK in particular with American banks, there was a sort of like moving a lot of jobs and processes out to India and other areas in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, mainly around the cost cutting and flexibility. And a lot of people would say they didn't think the operating model would work because you were stretched over time zones. And those concerns are valid, but these models do work. I mean, I was first would do it, but that was almost like the initial high-level, plausible, polite, logical change. But really, what they were worried about is losing their job, or their friends losing their job, or people losing their job, the office shutting down, then having to move. So it's like their little world. So once we understood that, we could sit down and work with them. Obviously, it wasn't a very good message to say, people will lose their job and what have you. But basically, we got down to like that second bullet point there, what it really means. And that was actually quite good. I mean, it wasn't a particularly pleasant conversation, I can tell you that, but allowed us to focus on what they were worried about. And obviously, it's probably sort of cover this point as well. They can implement some changes to improve the situation. And this is where the human engagement gets rather messy. For somebody who's very structured with slight OCD as myself, this sort of messiness and this very fluid ways of doing things, I find quite uncomfortable, and I'm not the only one. But you have to almost react and proact as you go along. So basically, you need to do some sort of analysis around sort of stakeholder analysis. Basically, I mean, this is where it gets a little bit sort of like very sort of like theoretical and academia. Is a stakeholder is any group or individual impacted by the change, whether they're internal people, whether they're customers. And these customers could be massive B2B enterprises, global, all the way down to somebody who's a retail punter on the street, suppliers, regulators, etc. Anyone, any individual or human or group of humans impacted by the change. So basically, what you need to work out for each of these individuals or these groupings or these stakeholder groups is you need really a two-way communication. I mean, the challenge you have is on the previous high-level management is very much the manager, the ruler talking to the rules. So you need to have a much more two-way, that's like a peer-to-peer communication. So basically, you really need to listen to individuals regarding their views on the change. They need to be comfortable enough to speak to you openly about the change. Are they happy about the change? Are they worried? Are they concerned? Do they have any suggestions? Bear in mind, some of these people, if there's going to impact an operations team and they're in the operations team, they might have some good ideas. Say that they're at the coalface, they're doing the work, so why wouldn't they know more than you? The key thing here is often trying to read between the lines, which is a UK phrase, to try and understand what was actually being said. It comes back to that point I mentioned before with JP Morgan having the two levels of communication. You need to understand what they really worried about. It's not always what they say. So you need to sort of like press very tactfully to try and find out what's being said. And what that could actually do is, once you've got this information, some of this stuff's a goldmine, and I've done it in the past. And people have come in with pushback and have listened and have concerned and worried about changes. When you've listened to it, you think, yes, that's a really good point. How on earth did we not pick this up earlier? Or, we must have really dropped the ball here to miss this. So you can actually put the suggestions into the change. Although, having said that, not every suggestion can be put into the change, because sometimes, if you're doing cost cutting and somebody says you shouldn't be doing it, it's a bit tricky thing to do. But it allows you to have a proper conversation to explain details behind it. The method, and this is where it gets a bit tricky, really, is it really depends on the person or the stakeholder group you're talking to. Obviously, if you've got a massive corporate-wide change, you can't do individual team meetings on a one-to-one basis, because you're going to end up thousands of them and nothing ever happens. But you can, somebody, you need to be prepared. Occasionally, somebody might want a one-to-one meeting with a member of the change team or senior management. So you need to factor that in, because you don't want to say no, not been doing. You might want to do meetings in, I say on Teams. I mean, that's not MS Teams like we're on now. That is in project operational teams or departmental teams. Get them into a group. Again, some people might want to do them face to face. Sometimes these more awkward conversations are much easier face to face. It doesn't always seem at the time, I can tell you that, but sometimes face to face you can see the anger or the pain or the worry in people's eyes. It allows you to adapt quickly. Do them over the telephone. Personally, I don't prefer that, because it's not that personal. But sometimes you might want to do it. Again, it depends on the individuals and where they're based and how they communicate. You might want to get focus groups. You invite people to come and have a talk. Again, works sometimes, doesn't work sometimes. And sometimes private email can help as well. You may get somebody who's very quiet, who's very junior, maybe doesn't have a lot of confidence to stand up in a one-to-one meeting or face-to-face discussion. He or she or they might want to send you an email. Again, there's no real issue on this. Whatever the person who needs to communicate to you is happy with. But the key point is there, just to reinside, is that you need to ensure that all the groups are happy with the method. Otherwise, they won't engage. If they feel that you're just going through the motions and you're not going to do anything about it, then why would they communicate? Well, you've lost a lot of wealth and you've lost a lot of engagement. And the key thing there is assume that all communication is private and confidential. Some of these people will be very nervous about speaking out against a change project, particularly in some of the more hostile organisations we work with. So if they feel that you're going to slaughter them, sack them, or they feel uncomfortable, they won't communicate. So you have to really stress this is all private and confidential. And frequency, again, this is a bit of a tricky one, really. So I think, sorry, I'm losing my voice. The key here, as and when required. So I wrote down there weekly, fortnightly, as and when required. I must admit, I tend to try and do these things at least fortnightly if I have the calls, and maybe with as and when required in between. It basically means somebody asks you for a meeting to discuss that. As long as you book the meeting in within a week or even 2 weeks, they'll be comfortable. It's not a case of you might have to drop everything to grab it, but sometimes you just need to be reasonable here. Obviously, if you've got stuff to do, you can't meet everybody everywhere. So what are the benefits? Well, basically allows people to ask you questions and for you to answer them in the tailored way. As opposed to some sort of generic mumbo jumbo coming from the top, you can speak to people on a point-to-point basis. It helps stop miscommunication, which is one of the biggest problems with changes. Rumors, if there's one of the issues you have with rumors is once a rumor starts, it can almost become the truth, and then suddenly you've got a massive public relations issue to sort out. It stops misunderstandings, and ultimately it also stops lies. People will just lie about stuff. It will increase involvement. It should increase loyalty and understanding. I won't say it always increases happiness, because what you tell them may not be what they want to hear, but basically at least they're hearing what's actually going on. It may identify issues with change, as I mentioned on the previous page. These people who you may want to engage with, part of the human management type side, they may have ideas and suggestions that could improve the change. Scope items that are missing, possible problems, bring their wealth of experience to the change, and that will always help. Help build personal relationships with people, which is always good. It makes And it makes you as a change manager or a change team, project or even senior manager, much more approachable. I must admit, when I first started work 38 years ago almost now, my manager was a bit of a dragon, and I was absolutely terrified to go and speak to him. And I thought that whenever I was a manager, I'll make myself as approachable as possible. And it makes people, if people are scared to speak to you, then that's a problem. But this sort of like two-way communication, especially if it's proactive with yourself, is making it much more approachable. And also, people are much happier if they're listened to. It allows people to get things off the chest. They may not like the fact you say, I appreciate what you're saying, but the cost cuttings are still going to happen. But it allows you to sort of bring all that information in. But there are some challenges, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, I made this sound all very simple, but unfortunately, it's not as simple as it sounds. There could be missing groups of people. So, especially a large organisation, you will often get some people who are quite vocal, and certain teams are quite vocal, and other people will follow on behind other vocal people. But you could have individual people who are very introverted, very shy, maybe a bit nervous, or teams that you've just completely forgotten about. Especially these large organisations with head offices and local offices, it's easy to be done. So therefore, you would need to keep scanning and at team meetings, other meetings, even human management meetings. Say, is anybody else I should be talking to? I haven't heard anything from the technology team. I haven't heard anything from the sales team. Do you think they should be involved in what we're trying to do? And also, that basically means you have to ask tactfully to see if anybody is missing or should be spoken to. And I mentioned this before, and I'm going to stress it again. Everything must be strictly private and confidential. Otherwise, people will not want to open up. If you have a meeting and they want to go and talk to their friends about the meeting, that's fine. But you as a change manager or a manager, you need to keep it confidential to build trust. So, shouldn't I know Teams meetings, including this one's recorded, but if you're doing any of these type of meetings on an individual basis, no recordings. I would probably just take paper notes. I wouldn't do any electronic notes unless the person's happy with it. Minimum amount of email traffic unless the other side wants to be discussed. And if you do suggest any ideas, to say, I didn't speak, Freddie in Ops complained about this, so therefore I've changed it. Just say it's come to our attention that the operations team are nervous about this. So keep it anonymous so people aren't worried about being singled out. And I've even been to places before where you even admit the briefing sessions never took place, but I wouldn't really go down that route. It makes it sound sort of a little bit cloak and dagger. So other challenges. Remember that good listening skills are required. This is very much a listening and understanding type thing. As I mentioned before, the first three is normally clever, logical, etc. And the second reason is the real reason. So you probably need to do a little bit of probing. Just 1 second. Right, my hay fever's starting to catch up on me. So I said before, you need good listening skills. So the first reason is normally clever, logical, etc. And the second reason is the real reason. So you need to sort of like do very tactful probing, but not to try and understand the real reason for pushing back. I gave the example about offshoring, where people are worried about the process not working, but really they're worried about their jobs, their mates' jobs, and sort of like the social fabric of the company. Very easy to start to dictate. So again, remember you're there to listen and learn, not to dictate. Try and read between lines. Again, this is very much like the first and second reason. You try and understand what people are really saying, not what they're actually saying, if you know what I mean. Try and understand what they're worried about. You've got to be tolerant of other people. And I've been in some of these sessions where the person I'm working with is literally being quite abusive and rude to me, and often factually incorrect. And sometimes you just need to say, we sit back, I'll just listen, be thick-skinned, and just go with that. You've got to be patient, because these sessions can take a while to go through, especially if someone's a little, or a team are a little bit nervous, or they don't understand what you're saying. And empathy, I see something from their point of view. Sympathy, to understand where they're coming from. But these are all just very much normal human management changes. Other challenges. People can be slow to communicate on these sessions, maybe on a one-to-one basis. Some people are better on a team basis, some people aren't. So basically, you just need patience and tactful questions to try and tease out the points you're trying to make. And it can, as I said before, it can be very uncomfortable to you. You know, it can be aggressive or even abusive questions from groups. I've been there, and sometimes you're thinking, I wish the fire alarm would go off or something like that, so I can actually get out of the room, or the internet will hopefully go down, so I can lose connection. But sometimes you just need to go through it. People might often not having a go at you personally, even though they're having a go at the situation. You just have to be the person at the end taking it on the chin. As I said before, it's easy to take the questions as personal insults. You need to rise above it. You need to try and, as I said before, you need to listen to what's being said, not what they're saying. You know, I mean, try and listen to the message, read between the lines, and as the point there is to be thick-skinned, very similar to the above. And the other point to mention, it's not possible to fix everything. You know, they may raise issues about it, but you know, for example, I mentioned this project about cost cutting, and people just said they didn't want to do the cost cutting, but you know, it allowed me to sit down and explain to the individuals, you know, the reason we're doing the cost cutting is the company's losing money. You know, if we carried on this way, the firm, you know, we may have to shut down in 2 or 3 years or be sold off, which is probably worse than what we're doing. And you know, again, it wasn't particularly the most pleasant thing we've ever done, I can tell you that. I think the other side were, I won't say happier, maybe if they were listened to, but they were much more understanding that, you know, we'd taken the time to speak to them on a one-to-one basis. And the other point there, it will require lots and lots of effort. So don't you know, people think of project management as very much like project plans and RAID logs and building right technologies and building new product, but it could be lots of one-to-ones and meetings could be required. So therefore, build it into your schedule. As a senior manager or a change manager, you really need to have this built into your schedule. So therefore, we've actually covered everything now. Just before I do a wrap up, so we've covered changes not implemented successfully. I think we'll all agree with that. Because change projects, they impact society in a very negative way, ranging from money lost to criminal prosecutions. And we had a look at why change fails. And we said that one of the ways to try and improve the likelihood of change is the human element of change. And therefore, we looked at what is the human element of change and why is it important. So, summarize, this is probably one of the key points I mentioned earlier. Change is a human phenomenon. It is triggered by people. We had a slide on that. It's implemented by people and it's used by people. Therefore, it is important to manage the human side of change as individuals or groups of individuals and not treat them as faceless resources. Therefore, it's important to understand their concerns, suggestions, fears. So remediation activity can be taken if required, but remember, sometimes it's not always possible. Therefore, a bespoke engagement plan is required. But as I said before, this will require a significant amount of effort, but it will dramatically increase the likelihood of change success. So thank you for listening. So now, if you want to discuss any of these points in more detail, hopefully at the bottom there you can see my Google Mail address, my personal email website, and my LinkedIn page. Obviously, there's a book that a lot of this stuff's pulled from called The Human's Guide to Change, which is available on Amazon, Waterstones, and all those other great sites. And I've written 2 other books that may also be of interest, but Emerging Technology or Financial Technology, and also the book around if you want to go contracting. So thank you very much. If anybody's got any questions, please post them in. But otherwise, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.